performance royalties are payments made to songwriters, composers, and publishers when their music is played publicly, when it's performed. Performance royalties. Go figure. This includes radio, television, live performances, which a lot of people don't think about, and digital streams. Is fact or fiction, Dave?
Yeah, that sounds accurate. I think where it gets a little weird is Pandora performance royalties, or are they not? And it's are those mechanicals? And it gets a little messy, and even I kind of start going a little cross-eyed trying to figure it all out.
Some of them are both. I think Spotify and, you'll see Pandora royalties on your BMI statement. I will see Pandora royalties, just pennies. So let's get farther into what performance rights are in just a general sense, again, because Dave has another video on this that you can watch, and not much has changed from that as far as this definition. But first, television, which is probably the most money that I make right now off of my BMI PRO, a performance rights organization. I make the most money from television shows. I had a new Love Island placement that played pretty well, and what was the other one? And other ones that continue to pay well, other songs. Television seems to be the main thing for us, those of us who are involved in sync. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And streaming and radio royalties aren't a lot because, for me, I'm not necessarily making radio-friendly music, and my publishers, that's not their business, isn't putting stuff out on the radio or even into the DSPs. So TV is like 99% of my royalties.
Now, there are artists out there who don't maybe get into sync at all. And if they're not, and if they're on the radio, and if they're doing well, I don't know why they're not looking into trying to sync their catalog. But radio was how I made thousands of dollars for years after a top 30 contemporary jazz single that I put out with my group Player A. And I did the whole thing, paid a radio promoter to promote it, and it's not very tough to chart in smooth jazz. It's only you only need about 25 stations to be playing at the same time to chart. But you can make money there too, thousands of dollars. I think it's $10,000 or more over the course of the time that's playing. It still gets a little bit.
Yeah, we have a member over in the community who does piano instrumentals, and he landed one of his tracks landed in a Sirius XM spa radio, and he's getting. I mean, it's not much; it's just one track, but he'll get like a few $100 a month, and that's not nothing. That'll pay the power bill or whatever, and it all adds up.
I had a jazz artist who got on Watercolors, which is the smooth jazz station on Sirius XM. And every time he did, you're looking at $4, $5, $6 just by being on there, because it's listened by so many people. People just put on that kind of music and they just leave it on all day. Sometimes it's in stores, it's in
businesses,
all sorts of stuff.
100%.
Really, though, where you make your money with SiriusXM is in a whole nother place, which is Sound Exchange. But we're not going to get into that today. But there is some money that can come from BMI as well, from radio. Streaming is a stepchild as far as how much you're going to see from your music. I know people who really work the streaming and playlist thing. My buddy Mark, he just crushes with his ambient type of music that people just leave on for hours, and they leave these playlists on, and that pays a lot. You'd be surprised how much, that he is making from PRO and Sound Exchange and all these places, and Pandora and all these places that are just that pay a lot. The pieces of pennies can add up. And then another thing that people don't think about, but we do because we see our statements as sync people, is international payments. International has probably been the most money that I get from my PRO. And it's the most money I get from music being played. This is mainly television, but could include radio as well.
Yeah, for me, the international stuff is growing, especially since my bread and butter up till a few years ago was really like CBS Sports, what I did a ton of. So it's network and it's local, but now international placements just keep growing and growing to where now it's about 50-50 now, network stuff versus international.
And you know this, but I just saw for the first time, I had a big Love is Blind placement. It's a very nice one. And it paid out a lot this month. It's like, because it aired in October of 23, and I started seeing the first payments last year, and $40, $50, I think maybe 100 and something bucks for the very first month that it played. But now I saw $100 from it. And then I'm starting to see Love is Blind Finland, Love is Blind, all these kind of places where it's been either they're playing that same show in Finland and it's getting new, or it's in another, version of Love is Blind.
Here's the thing with those shows, you know what I mean? Like getting big sports placement on the NFL or whatever is really, really cool. But at the end of the day, those are like a moment in time, and they're not playing reruns of, the second round of the NCAA tournament from 2022. That's not getting air. So you might get a big hit up front, but it doesn't have legs, right? The industry, it doesn't have legs. But when you get into some of these like reality shows, whether it's cable or streaming or international, the initial payouts are lower, but those shows get rerun a ton. They're always available. And every time a new season comes out, then there is an uptick of people watching and binging the previous seasons. Yep. So I've gotten, placements on Temptation Island that I've gotten more royalties from a queue on Temptation Island as it gets worked through the reruns and showing up multiple seasons. More royalties from that than like a placement in the Final Four.
Is Temptation Island close to Love Island? I wonder are they like in like Turks and Caicos? I mean, are they?
I don't know. Yeah, it's on the map, right? Oh man,
you could swim from one to the other. I'm glad you said that about the NFL, and I have a placement or had a placement in early 2024, maybe 2023, in a Ritz commercial that was played during an NFL, during the playoffs. Now, of course, you can't trust necessarily what TuneSat and things tell you exactly, but it said, it's mentioned several NFL games. And I've talked with the library and they're saying, we need to track this down. Make sure you send a letter to, BMI and all this kind of stuff and make sure you track it down. But it's very odd because the only place I can really find it is on YouTube because Ritz Crackers is who did it, but it starred a quarterback from the Jacksonville Jaguars. And it has some drum music playing for 10 seconds or so that I did. Yeah. What about commercials? Do they generate PRO? And if they're rerun on radio or TV? You know anything about that?
In my experience, and admittedly, I haven't done a ton of ad placements beyond like teasers for sports or whatever. But in my experience, there's kind of a bigger chunk up front. And because these ads are usually very limited, they're limited run and that kind of thing, the royalties aren't that hot. I did a commercial for an ISP somewhere in the Midwest, up north or something, and it was a pretty small market. It was a 30-second ad. It was for Mediacom, I think, is the name of the ISP, and paid some money, a couple of grand up front, and then just trickled in royalties. And then when the spot stopped running, then the royalties stopped. So
I think I've seen a few things for commercials, but not much. What about film? In the United States, there is no PRO for film, but I have seen my music used in some movies overseas. Of course, I'm not really talking about Hulu movies necessarily, but that is one, right? That we see some things where they've used a piece of some of those Christmas movies. How many cues do they use in one of those movies? 1,000? I mean, there's a new cue playing every 30 to 60 seconds, Christmas cues and things like that. But what about film outside of the United States? Is there any money that trickles back to our PROs?
I don't see how it wouldn't, but I haven't done any international film placements. All of my international has been usually reality TV.
Yeah. I've had a few movies, but again, I can't tell if they were movies that were just made for Hulu or made for Netflix or something like that. And then those are just Netflixy payments. Video games? Any PRO from video games?
Typically, no. Yeah. Typically, they're buyouts because the industry isn't set up to gather performance data or cue sheets. No game is submitting cue sheets. So the only royalties you could make is if you have a deal with the game developer and the game publisher so that you can maintain some of the rights over the music so that you can publish it on the DSPs. Gotcha. For the most part, anytime you see a soundtrack in Spotify, that's probably put out by the composer. I know Jason Graves, that's his arrangement. He gets paid up front, but he doesn't get any back end off of the actual game sales, but he has written into his contract that he maintains some of the rights, and so he produces the soundtrack and he gets the royalties from the DSPs.
And I think we should also say that there is a bit of streaming income starting to happen with Sync, because many of the libraries will put the album that they publish on their library up on Spotify and Apple and all that. I know I do. I'm sitting there like Shazamming like crazy sometimes, like, what is this on this show, and trying to figure out who's doing that. And then I look at the artist and say, how is that artist? I wonder how that artist is getting their music out. And so there is some money to be made on streaming for the libraries, and that's part of most standard deals that we get a piece of that, 50% of that, I believe. Right?
Yeah, and I think libraries I think they're getting more hip to it, and I think it's just an increasingly common cost of doing business. I have one library who doesn't ever publish anything up to the DSPs, and I have another library who publishes everything to the DSPs, and their catalog is public facing. Because I think composers are hipper to it. I think technology like Shazam enables people to hear a vocal up song on a TV show, and they'll Shazam it and hopefully try to find it. Mm-hmm. Is it going to bring in a ton of extra royalties? No. I think that it's more for awareness for the library themselves, but it is something, and something's better than nothing.
And that in streaming, this is getting away from PRO for a second, but in streaming, they have really started to dial in who's involved with every song. You're starting to see all the writers, the producers, the companies, the artist name, and everything. My BMG library will often share the credit for when they put it up to Spotify, their name and my Positive Spin Songs streaming thing. And so people can see both, and they're hearing a song on a TV show, and it's filtering back to my Positive Spin Songs Spotify site and giving me new followers and income. So that's kind of crazy. Yeah. Lastly, before we end up what is performance rights, I do want to make sure that people know that live performance is a performance rights income. I know this for sure because I was doing my master's. I did something at the Orlando Dr. Phillips Center, and before we did our stuff, my professor made sure that we all were registered as classical composers. It's a separate registration, really, with BMI at least. You have to register as a classical composer. It's not even included. That's why I'd ask you at the beginning of a BMI registration, is this a classical piece for performance? And it's a different thing than everything else, apparently. And I did, and I got $75 writers, $75 publishers for a 8-minute piece that was played on there. And so people are also getting paid this if they're turning in their tour sheets and things like that, where they played, and all those places that are bars and different places like that all play a blanket license. And you can literally, if you're a band or an artist, make performance royalties from where you played. Have you had that happen at all?
Man, I don't think I've ever gotten any live performance, just because I don't think anybody wants to hear me try to play jangly ukulele or hip hop.
I'm thinking
beats.
I'm drum solo tour is what I'm thinking.
Go. Yep, done. Yep. As long as I got a roadie, because I have retired from schlepping gear. If there's backline, well, let's talk. But
okay.